1. The story from my perspective. While at a festival, a man walked up to me and stared me dead in the eyes. His irises were so dark that it was impossible for me to distinguish his pupils. He spoke. "What was that? Do you see it?" I suddenly saw a bright array of colors surrounding him, much like what I think to be an aura. "Can you hear it?" The aura faded away, and I heard a bunch of high-pitched harmonic hums resembling an ensemble of singing bowls. "Perhaps you can smell it." The sound was no longer present, but I smelled an indescribable fragrance. It's a little bit of a stretch to say it resembled lavender. "Or can you taste it?" I experienced a taste in my mouth similar to that of a cough drop. My mind was blown. From what I experienced, this man was playing with my senses, simply by looking at me and speaking. It was as if he had special consciousness-related powers. I asked his name and he said, "I have no name." He walked away, and I never saw him again. Possible explanations. Skepticism. It was my third day at the festival. I was sleep-deprived and a little dehydrated, which could have induced a mild delirium. That, on top of my active search for anomalous phenomena, I was simply exhibiting a strong form of confirmation bias that altered my perception. Objectively, this man just said a bunch of nonsense that happened to mix strangely with my state of mind at that time. Idealism. My experience was as real as it gets. This man was a guru of some sort of, perhaps an ET, or maybe a very experienced hypnotist. He uses consciousness as a gateway to the realm of reality unknown to the orthodox perspective. To fully understand what happened, a radical worldview change must come forth. My conclusion. The data fits both explanations, so which is the true one? I don't know, but I assure you the raw experience was real. Judging by experience alone, someone was playing with my senses. Discussing whether or not it actually happened calls into question the concept of objectivity, and the validity of the intuitive and subjective as means of investigating reality. So yes, someone played with my senses, to me. What that means, whether that counts as real, is up to an individual's ideological framework. Thanks for listening. 2. My very first event happened when I was about 5. In this particular instance, I was wide awake and perfectly cognitive. It started in my aunt's house, whom we were visiting that particular day. I was just sitting with all my parents in the lounge. There was a gathering of sorts that day, but at some point I remembered having a severe urge to relieve myself. So I got up, and someone asked where I was going. I turned and told them, "I will come back soon. I just need to use the loo." And off I went to the nearest one. Just as I was nearly at the door, my great-grandpa, I just knew him as Grandpa though, came rushing down the corridor and slipped inside the loo. I was not happy, but was raised to respect my elders, so I waited, and waited, for what seemed like an eternity. I was ready to poop, but I returned to the lounge and told my mom that Grandpa was taking really long to finish in the loo. She looks at me and says, "Just wait a bit longer, I'm sure he's almost done." I nod and walk back to the door, waiting some more. After about another 5 minutes, I can't keep it in anymore, and I knock on the door, thinking perhaps he had left when I went to tell my mom that he was in there. No reply. So I slowly start pushing the door. I did it slowly, in case he didn't hear me. As I got the door halfway open, I see him laying next to the toilet, his cane slightly hidden underneath his one shoulder. I'm 5. I go back to the lounge and tell my mom, "Can you please help me? Grandpa is sleeping in the toilet and I need to pee." The whole lounge full of women go dead quiet. My one aunt says, "What do you mean Grandpa is sleeping in the toilet?" I take my mom's hand and lead her to the bathroom. All the aunts follow. As we get to the door of the bathroom, all of them start screaming. My aunt, whose house it is, tells me to use the loo in her room and pulls me away. Fast forward. I'm about 18 to 19. The memory suddenly flashes past my mind again. I'm curious as to what happened that day. I'm older now, so I figured out he probably died. But something is still bugging me. So I go to my grandma, a truthful person if ever there was. Clarification. It was her dad I saw die. I basically just kinda jumped into the conversation and go, "Hey Grandma, you remember when I was little and we were at my aunt's house and I was about 5? And I told all of you in the lounge that Grandpa was sleeping in the toilet, and I really had to go?" The blood drained from her face, and she stopped what she was doing, looked at me and said, "What are you talking about? Which Grandpa?" So I look at her and frown, saying, "You know, the Grandpa, with the weird thick black rimmed glasses and the cane." She just looked at me and asked a few more details, sat down, and looked at me quietly for a moment, almost as if she was trying to figure out if I was lying. It was the most uncomfortable 2 minutes of my life. Finally, she looked at me and said, almost in tears, that there's no way I could have known that or seen that. I'm perplexed as hell. She continues to tell me that it was her father, my great-grandfather, but he died when I was about 3 to 4, and he died in an old age home. But the nurses found him face down next to a toilet, with his cane laying under his shoulder. I freaked. Then later in life, it had built up to a whole new level of, can someone please make this stop? It started around the time I had just gotten into high school, so around the time I was about 12 to 13, I guess. It was register period. On the first day back after school holidays. Second semester for everyone who is curious. We all wait for our names to be read, and each of us reply. The teacher reads out a name and nobody answers. Out of nowhere I get this feeling like someone just ripped my stomach out and replaced it with ice cubes. I find it odd, but I can't shake the feeling. Anyway, about 5 minutes later, another new student enters the class, and my jaw almost drops. Except for having red hair, she could have been my twin otherwise. The teacher sits her next to me, but I can't stop staring. She notices me and looks just as astonished. We begin a conversation, but the uneasy feeling stays with me. About 10 minutes later, the principal walks into the classroom, and I freeze and clutch the desk. Here it comes. The teacher notices and walks over to the principal. They lean in together, and he whispers something to her. She nods and steps forward facing the class. "I'm sorry, but Miss X, girl not present at register that morning, has passed away over the holidays. She committed suicide." I tuned out the rest of what was said and just started crying uncontrollably. And that set off the rest of the class. Now, the dreams. The dreams started after this. I cannot say why, as I don't know. To go into each and every specific dream would be insanity, as it is very detailed. Let's just say when people I have had contact with, no matter how briefly in life, are about to die, I dream their deaths about 3 days beforehand. I will simply state that it is not possible to be mere coincidences, based on how many people's deaths I have dreamt. The list: 2 colleagues I have worked with, 3 grandparents, 1 great-grandfather, 1 friend's grandfather, 2 school teachers, murder, suicide like my dream, 1 lady I met briefly for 5 minutes one day at work, at least 3 friends. all dead, within 3 days of my dreams. Make of it what you will. 3. Long-winded backstory warning. Having an interest in writing, I tend to keep very detailed notes, even when it comes to shopping lists and minor things. I'm always very detailed so as not to miss anything. A few years back, I was very close with a girl I met through an ex. Drama ensued, I stole his best friend, blah. We'll call her Kelly. Anyways, not long after her and I started hanging out on the regular, days off and weekends mostly, where we would sit and chat and smoke cigarettes. The usual. I started to feel quite connected to her, almost as if some invisible wire had connected us. Now, I'm not really one to go for the whole, oh my god, we're so connected because we're besties, it must be some kind of sign. Nope, none of that. I do, however, believe in the paranormal, and that we do connect with loved ones in some way or another. But that's not on topic. What is on topic, however, ties in with the backstory. In a way. Kelly and her mom, Sue, both believed in the supernatural. What I'd call more spiritual than religious, really. What I mean is, unbeknownst to me at first, she regularly consulted tarot cards to divine things. Not super seriously, but she took their messages how they came. A message from loved ones and spirit guides to help us on our way. Suggestions, guidelines, a push in the right direction, whatever you'd call it. Now this didn't bother me in the least because, unknown to them too, I also had been using tarot cards for about a year, on and off. It was when Kelly went to borrow socks from my overnight bag, and I dropped my deck. We had a laugh, and I got nervous, but Kelly goes to her desk drawer and pulls out her deck. Odd enough for me, but I took it as a good thing for sure. For those of you who don't know too much about tarot, I can elaborate further on this part if you wish. Condensed as much of it as I could to be clear and concise as I could. Again, not to get all hocus pocus, but it was later that night when we all had the discussion about the cards. Meanings, messages, and just beliefs being talked about. Sue mentions something about reading into the cards. She keeps records of significant messages to her. A few months back, and she brings out a huge binder. She flips back to May. May was when I broke up with my ex. She was doing a reading for Kelly. The question asked was, what will happen in the near future? The main message, present, death card, meaning change, past, 5 of swords, meaning conflict and betrayal, future, 8 of wands, meaning travel, either traveling as in a trip, vacation, or someone traveling into, out of your life. And the kicker that made me start to wonder what was going on. The card and the outcome of the situation place. Queen of Cups. More specifically, court cards resemble a person. Usually means a person. Me. How do I know this? Well, I had gotten to know my cards pretty well by now. And I knew which ones represent me, based on birthday and star sign, etc. It was until that night that things began to change. It was seriously like something new. It was leaving breadcrumbs for Hansel and Gretel. I needed to backpedal out of sight, cover the tracks, so to speak. At first it was little things, like thinking of Kelly and getting a text from her, showing up with something she needed, wanted. Little coincidences. Then it was a big one. I came over one day in 2009, and the family was sitting in the backyard. Their dog, Fido, was in the house. If Fido knew your footsteps and your voice, scent, he didn't care about you at all. Well, this day I walk in, and as I'm heading out through the kitchen, connected via a sitting room, back porch area in the backyard, Fido sees me from the back porch. Doesn't he start to growl, bare his teeth, then pins me to the kitchen door, barking in my face. And let me tell you, he wasn't a small dog. I managed to get into the front porch, out of the house, and walk around to the back fence. Rob, Kelly's dad, asks why I looked so freaked out. Wonders if something's wrong. Asks if everything is okay at home. So I start telling people about me walking in and Fido going berserk on me. That's when they all looked at me like I was crazy. Not 5 seconds ago, that dog would have been heard at the gas station 2 minutes down the road. Yet with all the windows open and the patio table right by the kitchen, nobody saw or heard me apparently upsetting the dog. Then they pointed to the doghouse in the backyard where the pooch was taking a nap. And they only have one dog. That's what convinced me that things were getting weird. Fido died in February of that year. Not part of the incident, but continues below. Long story short, once I started to notice things changing around, I began to scrutinize everything and document it as best I could. First in writing on paper, and also on my PC. That is why the title of this post is such, because I dubbed my experiences and instances incidentals. I began to notice changes. I tried to make sure I had things written down. Mostly so I could remember it at first. And then later I told Kelly and her mom to compare experiences and to see what lined up. We had been hanging out for I'd say 4 or 5 months when that first incident happened. We had become quite inseparable and basically had sleepovers at each other's houses for extended amounts of time. The first time the déjà vu happened, I remember feeling it vividly. I was so shocked at how eerily similar the scene had played out as I remembered dreaming it almost a year prior. As soon as my brain clued into what was happening, I was playing the dream scene out in my head as it was happening in life. Albeit, I'll admit, I must have looked like a deer in the headlights as I came to the realization. The others happened pretty much in sequence. Not all of them were déjà vu. A couple of those incidents just kind of happened and were written down no more than an hour after each happened. Sometimes as they happened, if I had paper or my PC with me. Seeing as I've probably bored most of you, I'll do a bare-bones recollection of the other events. Déjà vu. Near the end of July 2010, I had a dream. The dream was set in a yellow kitchen. I saw an old wood door, parlor ceiling. Looks worn. Kitchen seemed very familiar, but couldn't place whose kitchen it was. I was doing dishes and loading a dishwasher when a lady with shorter blonde hair, whose face I recognized in the dream, asked me if I wanted pie. She then added, "It's apple cinnamon." In mid-September of 2011, at Thanksgiving dinner at Kelly, my friend's house, who I had met in September 2010 via my ex-boyfriend, we had just finished dinner. I came back from a smoke break with her and started the dishes. While I was loading the dishwasher, Kelly's mother, Sue, asked me if I wanted pie. Apple cinnamon pie. I must have made a face because she then asked me what was wrong. I told her I had had déjà vu about the things that just happened, but it didn't hit me until now who the people in my dream were. When I went over the dream in my notes again, it was definitely Sue. The face being someone I recognized, but not at the time made sense. She also has short blonde hair. The kitchen in the house is yellow. It's an older house, approximately 100 years old. Hard to mistake the wood floor and ceiling for anybody else's. And nobody else that I know had a yellow kitchen. The man, Fido visit. On Halloween of 2011, I was staying at Kelly's house. We had been talking in the back porch about it being All Hallows Eve, and that spirits would be roaming. Sue and Rob were telling me about the history of their house being a funeral parlor. Kelly and I went to tuck into bed around 1:30 a.m. and put their new puppy Jack to bed. About an hour later, we heard him going hysterical in his crate. We figured he just had to pee because he had not wanted to go out at 1:30. Kelly decided she would just go down there and tell him to be quiet and go to sleep. However, while we were laying there, waiting to see if he would stop barking on his own, a very deep and booming voice yelled, "Shut up!" at the dog from downstairs. Not even 10 minutes later, the dog started whimpering and barking again. Kelly jumped up, angry at this point, and went down the stairs. No sooner did she pop her head out of the doorway, she said, "Whoa." I asked, "Whoa, what?" and there was no answer. Kelly, what? What? She ran up the stairs and dove into the bed, shaking. She just told me to be quiet and waited a second before continuing. She told me there was some guy almost 7 feet tall and scary looking. He was by the dog cage, which explained why the dog was barking. Kelly and I assumed this might have been Rob because we heard the stairs. Rob came down a minute later to the crate and told Jack to cut his shit and go to bed. The voice that yells "shut up" wasn't Rob because the next thing we know, there is Rob asking us up the loft stairs why we are shouting at the dog. We said we thought it was him, but he told us that he just got down, and all he said to the dog was cut your shit and go to bed, which both Kelly and I heard and saw. After the incident with the man, the dog calmed down. At about 5 a.m. I was half awake, still after talking and being spooked. At this point, I felt the bed sink, and I figured that one of the cats was upstairs. I looked down and saw nothing. I heard nails clicking on the floorboards. Then, I felt as if something was hugging my chest, and it got heavier on me. I was unable to move, pinned down, and I could hear the panting in my ear. I was pushing and hitting Kelly with my elbow, but it did not wake her up. For some reason, I was too scared to make any noise. Sue and Rob said Fido, their old dog, used to do that when he was tired or trying to comfort someone upset. He would lie on you like he was hugging you. Paws on shoulders. The gazebo. In February of 2012, I had a dream that I was in Kelly's backyard. We were sitting around talking about something, but I couldn't remember what. We were sitting in a tent, gazebo. It was screened in, and it was a beige color. It was in the backyard behind the house, beside the tree. It was also very windy in my dream. Oddly, Sue told me that this was exactly the description of the gazebo they had in the exact spot where I had said it was. It also was the same color. They used to sit and eat or smoke in there because the bugs couldn't get into it. It had been taken away by a huge gust of wind in the summer 3 years before. I don't know how I knew this. I wasn't around them then, and the gazebo never came up in conversation before. This was the first time I'd described something I would have had no prior knowledge about, because it was way before I had met them, and before I had ever been to the city where we then lived. The missing door. At Sasha's birthday party, Kelly's sister, I was sitting on the couch talking with Sue and Tiffany, Sasha's friend, about getting Sue's kittens fixed. Sue mentioned that they would probably need cones around their heads, and I'd asked how they'd eat like that. Tiff asked, they would need to be separated too, wouldn't they? If it's one at a time? I said, yeah. Paused a second, and then I said, you could put one in the cat room and the other in the dressing room. Then Sue said, no, we can't, because the dressing room doesn't have a door. As far as I could remember being in that house on and off for close to 2.5 years, it always had a door. Always. Sue looked at me and I said, yes it does. Then we went up to the landing and looked at it. No door. Sue then said, hell, you watched me painting the bathroom the other day when you came back from the movies. Still never had a door. I argued that it had, and that it had been red with aqua on the frame, and that Kelly had painted it when she was 11, because she showed me pictures with a door and those specific colors. Sue then said, you're fucked. And I laughed and asked her, why do you say that? Sue moved in when Kelly was a newborn, which doesn't make sense to me at this point. Ever since they've known me, there has been a door on it, and I've seen it closed many times when Sue is getting ready for work. Sue says to Rob, who was walking by, Rob, he's creeping me out. To which he replied, who, Brad? What's he doing? And Sue looked at him and said, he's telling me things about her house that he shouldn't know. Oh, like what? Like there being a door on the changing room. There's never been a door in that room for close to 15 years, Rob says. That's the truth though, there hasn't been. I never put one up. I found the picture in the photo album Kelly had shown me, with the door picture. No door. But now, the walls inside the room itself were red with an aqua border. Not just the door. Kelly had told me that all she was allowed to paint at 11 was the door because of her interesting color schemes. This would be the second time I've known things I shouldn't know. I also consider it a second possible glitch because there is no way I could mistake a door for an entire room. Even if I forgot there wasn't a door there, it doesn't explain how a whole room gets painted those colors, seemingly out of nowhere. These are all real, and not made up or altered in any way. Except names for privacy reasons. It's up to you if you believe me or not. Please share your thoughts with me. I'd like to know what people think of this. 4. About 20 years ago, when I was in my late teens, I worked at a local pub with a friend. I'll call him Degsy. Me and Degs had a really strange experience during work one morning, and though I had never considered it a glitch in the Matrix before I found this subreddit, this does seem to be the perfect place for it. During service at this pub, bartenders would throw empty bottles indiscriminately into crates beneath the bar. On weekend mornings, Degsy and I would take these crates of random bottles to a courtyard at the rear of the building and sort them for recycling. Get all of the green, brown bottles into one crate, small, clear into another, etc. Anyway, one morning, Degsy and I were both outside sorting bottles. I was on the side of the building with the double doors. Degsy was around the corner, out of sight from me. This is where the oddness began. I spilled some beer or something on my hands, and headed inside to wash them. The sink was just inside to the right of those white doors. I hadn't seen Degsy for a few minutes, so before I went in, I poked my head around the corner to see what he was up to. To my amusement, he was standing, motionless, staring at the crates of empty beer bottles in front of him. I waited a few seconds for him to look up, so I could point and laugh or whatever. But he didn't seem to notice me. So I stepped fully out from around the counter, clearly within his peripheral vision, but only 6 to 8 feet away. But he still didn't look over. He just stood there, motionless, staring at the crates. This in itself wasn't overly weird. We drank on weekend nights and worked relatively early the following mornings. So I put it down to just tiredness on his part. I went inside to wash my hands, but no sooner had I turned on the tap, I heard footsteps and the distinctive rattling of bottles approaching from the corridor that led to the downstairs bar. I looked over my shoulder to see Degsy walk around the corner, from inside the pub. 2 crates stacked in his arms, right by me and out into the courtyard, where I had seen him only a few seconds earlier. I was stunned and took a minute or two to process what I saw. I couldn't think of a rational explanation for it, but didn't mention it to Degsy. I'm glad I didn't, because it adds a bit of credence to the rest of the story. You see, about 5 minutes later, I was inside and walking back towards the bar to fetch another crate, when I bumped into Degsy coming in the opposite direction, 2 crates of random bottles in his arms. He stopped dead in his tracks and stuttered something along the lines of, "The fuck are you doing here?" I asked him what he meant, and after pulling himself together a bit, but still bewildered, Degsy explained that he had just seen me a few seconds earlier in the bar behind him. I hadn't been in the bar area for some time, and even if I had, it wouldn't have been possible to cross paths en route from the bar to the courtyard without noticing each other. At this point, I told him my half of the story, and we chatted about it for a bit, but couldn't come up with any rational explanation for it. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to my latest Glitch in the Matrix video. Only the 4 this week, but I think you'll agree they were good ones. Also, pretty decent length all in all. So I wasn't too bothered about finding a 5th one. I thought we could just proceed as is, and it turned out not bad. At least I think it turned out not bad. Well, I don't know what happened earlier, but I had a hell of a time getting everything to start recording. Firstly, my bookmarks wouldn't sync. Eventually I got that sorted. Then this crappy old Logitech, what make is it anyway? MK320. This keyboard of mine, it used to work okay, but it's been through the wars. It's deciding it just doesn't want to work anymore, which is lovely. It might just be batteries, but the keyboard's kind of old and battered anyway, so it's time I got a new one. I just wish I could find a really good one that's backlit with the keys, but it has to be wireless also. I found one, but it's a little pricier than I want to pay for what it does, but I might have to end up buying that anyway, because like I say, I do need the keyboard, and we shall see. Anyway, I got that sorted, got that working properly, and then tried to record and discovered that Ableton didn't want to record. So I'm blaming everything on the keyboard there, really. I'm assuming something must have happened when I tried to start Ableton and it changed one of the settings because I had to go in and select my my recording device again. But everything's fine now. All those little spikes and everything are appearing happily like they should. Okay, and that was the saga of recording this video. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.